guys, happy Saturday. I've never done a live Facebook, but here I am. I'm gonna go live with my friend Derek, and we are currently trying to figure out how to do that. And I see him. Let's see. Derek is watching, and he's about to add on. Yes, we.
All right, you've done it. That's exciting.
Yeah, there you go. And it's our first time doing live on our Facebook together, I guess, interview,
Yeah, it is. Yeah, this is
conversation.
great. This is great. Well,
Yes.
thanks for having me here on your channel, Nereyda.
Yeah, thank you for doing this again. It's fun. It's
Oh,
always these
wow.
conversations.
Yeah,
And
sweet.
we wanted to talk about fear, right? And we had this conversation earlier. And you know what's so interesting? I was actually doing my makeup, right? And I was realizing how we've made a video about fear before and talked about it here and there. And from our conversation earlier, how much our perspective has changed from that video to now to making this one.
Mm,
And I was like, okay, like you mentioned some other stuff and I mentioned other stuff, and I was like, okay, this is gonna be cool.
yeah. Well, maybe we can just take a second to be in gratitude and celebrate that change really is this only constant that we can really count on, right? That everything is always changing, everything is expanding, right? We can be expanding, we can be contracting, but yeah, I, uh, I think our not just on a soul level, but even on a mental level, we truly thrive on this change, on this expansion. And I think sometimes, if we're talking about fear, I think uh, fear really is a way to protect us, right? So it's not necessarily a negative thing. I think a lot of people, and it's really hip, it's really cool to talk about fears, like, oh, choose love, not fear. It's like, okay, well, yes, but let's get into fear a bit. Like, why does it exist? Um, so if I may, can I talk a bit about like why we have this evolutionary like mechanism? Well, um, fear has served us so well
Definitely.
for so many generations, right? Like, I mean, you take the classic caveman example, right? Like, oh my goodness, a big animal, like that's scary, right? If I'm alone, right? Of course, when we have a group and we're working together with our minds, that's when we can create something that we can't do on our own, right? Like hunt this huge animal or, uh, anyways. So this fear response is in us to protect us from danger. But where we are now in our societies and our cultures is that sometimes we have this fight or flight fear response, and it's actually preventing us from the expansion that we might want. And one of the biggest reasons for this is that when we are when we're trying to introduce something new, when we're trying to change a habit, it actually takes our brain more energy. So unless we have, a written in stone guarantee of how beneficial this will be, spoiler, like we almost always don't. It's a risk, right? It's a risk to expand. It's a risk to engage in activities that are not previously ingrained in our neurological patterning, right? This is neurogenesis, this is habitual neural pathways we've created, right? So at some points, these don't serve us anymore, but our brain still runs on autopilot and says, hey, it takes less calories, it takes less effort to do this pattern. So I'm going to give you this fear response so that you stick to this pattern. Okay, I'm safe. I'm in this pattern. I'm safe. But it the real irony here is that with a small investment, sure, that day or those several days or those weeks of stepping into the unknown and taking those risks and having that fear response, um, it can be very difficult. It requires more energy. You get more in a fight or flight. You have more anxiety to move around. But by investing in this, ultimately on a soul level and on a deeper mental level, we become more satisfied and happy, and we create these new neural pathways, which are now our new safety net. So,
Yeah.
um,
It's interesting as you're saying, like the way that we change our habit or the way that we step into the unknown. And it's interesting when you're going through that change how that's fearful, even though it could bring more peace or more comfort or more love. It's so new that it's fearful. That's something that I've been realizing lately. And I wanted to bring up too how it's so interesting with fear for some reason, like something that I've learned this past year that I want to say is how sometimes fear is so undefined as well, because most of us aren't aware of these patterns or these habits, and it feels like fear is just so ingrained in us. And something that I was kind of reflecting on before I went on live with you was that in our last video I remember mentioning like, oh, fear is an illusion. Like, boom, that's the answer, right? In a way. And this past year, it seems like it's wait, like, hold on, going back to like choosing fear or choosing love. Like, yes, right? It's practice to choose love, but I think there is that process of stepping back and kind of feeling or realizing or being aware of where it comes from or why it's there. And I think before, for me, it was this just choose love like right off the bat, you know? And I wanted to mention something really quick too, because you're mentioning how where fear comes from and how it is inherent and how it's trying to protect us. And another realization that I've been having too is when we become aware of that, it feels that fear itself dissolves a little bit more. Like it doesn't seem like it's so heavy in a way.
yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head there. It's like by witnessing it, we can transform it, right? By being honest with what we're feeling. Um, I mean, any I don't want to say any. Most therapists will start with like, okay, well, we need to be honest. We need to feel through those feelings. Like maybe it's a bit too much at first, so do it in chapters. But at some point, we need to feel through those feelings. And fear is no different, right? By just saying, "Oh no, I'm not. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid." You're actually more likely to suppress that and then actually run away and distract yourself with something else rather than
Oh, definitely.
witnessing it and transforming it. And what one of the great things about fear is that fear is very tied to anxiety. Like even doing a live video, I'm feeling it a bit like ooh, ooh, right? But what is that? What is that fear? It's just a stimulation of our our nervous system, right? So it puts us in a bit of a state of fight or flight. But what does that actually do? That actually you're recruiting more resources, right, from your adrenals and your kidneys, and so if we just hold that fear and we're scared, it'll actually toxify our bodies. But if we can use that energy because it's energy. The fear is energy. This is the brilliant thing that science is discovering is that fear is energy, right? You're just tapping into more energy. So a lot of it is what do we do with that fear, right? What do we do with that energy? But the great thing is, well, we can witness it, become aware, and then we can transform it. Like we can literally use that energy
Yeah.
to excel at things, which is kind of mind-boggling and can kind of, you might be listening and thinking, well, okay, but how do I apply that? And the thing is that that's just a practice. It's a practice of witnessing where you're holding it and seeing what you can do with it.
And even going back to that too, piggyback writing, because I mentioned over the phone we were speaking how something that's popped up this past year the difference between our last video and now is how I've been learning so much about trauma, and friends that I've had that have been going or have been realizing their own trauma, and how a lot of fear also comes from that itself. And in the moment, we don't realize that it's stemming from a specific experience or a specific
Mm,
event from our lives until later when we do the work, it's like, oh shit, this is where it's coming from, you know? And I wanted to mention too, because I know we talk a lot about like stepping back and being aware of the fear, which totally works. Like it helped, that actually helped me move abroad, right? Because you're right. Like the first time around, like I wanted to go abroad. I was like, no, there's no fear. Like I'm just going to go on an adventure. Like everything's fine. And the fear itself of not witnessing it, it actually ended up me not going, or it kind of, I bottled it up and I manifested it out and I didn't end up going. And the second time around, I was like, okay, what are my fears? And I had like 20 of them, and I was able to transform them once witnessing them into faith and into something else, which is something that I also want to bring up. But going back to the trauma part, where sometimes the fear does take over, and I guess it's also allowing ourselves to feel it and to feel fear and the anxiety and the emotions, and being aware of that too, in a way. And I wanted to bring up the trust and the faith because I know over the phone you talked about that too, and that's something that you were more on speaking about than last time. So that's why I'm like, oh, it's so interesting how this past year, we've learned more about the concept of fear. So would you like to explain that a little bit? Like faith
yes,
and
I would.
trusting?
I would love to get into that, and thank you so much for calling that in. Again, I'd love to just take a second here for anyone who's listening, um, to just reflect for a second on any type of gratitude we can have, for what Nereyda is saying, with what you're saying, Nereyda, which is that, like, how much we grow even just in a year, and how much we can grow even just day to day. Um, Actually, it was funny. I was sending you this small little image because I wasn't sure what to send you so that we could connect via Skype, and it talks about not worrying about mastering your life, just master today. Do what you can do today, and then try to do that every day, right? So this kind of mindset, if we're operating in this mindset, we're more likely to be able to do, right, if we're focusing on small chapters and in the now. But back to what we're talking about faith and trusting. Um, what I have been on my personal journey, what I've really been learning is, when we as a collective, we talk about having faith in the all, the universe, in God, in consciousness, in the expansion of the universe. I think something we often, and just from what I've noticed in different circles, with the way people will talk about faith and trust, yet the way they will operate in their own sphere of influence and talking about themselves and their own limitations and fear, on going out and doing what they feel called to do, or they feel. Um, for a lot of people, there's a self-worth issue. It's like there's this toxic belief that many of us share, that I am not enough. I am not enough. I'm not enough to do this. But here's the thing: if we're having faith in the expansion of the universe, that everything is all, guess what? Wake up. You are actually perfect. You are an embodiment of the divine consciousness. So whatever you do, no, it's not a credit to you. You can say it's a credit to you, right? We can get all, yeah, I did this, I got 2 million views, or whatever. But ultimately, if we're in the belief and we're operating from the expansion of the universe, we're just a part of that. So any glory that you create, any offering that you do to better the world, that we can give that up to God, we can give that up to the universe, to divine creation, right? Just a little history here. The genetic coding in you, no matter what you are, race you are, it doesn't matter. You are you have all the genetic coding and all the wisdom and history of past lives from like multitudes, millennia of generations. So once we can start focusing on that, the reality of what we are, and that is the expansion of the universe, I think, at least for myself, it's become a little easier to get over my self-worth issues and say, yeah, fuck yeah, I can do that, because it's not really me, right? If we think about it, if we really think about it, from everything we've learned, everything we've learned from every teacher, every great friend, every humble person, or non-humble, whatever, any important lesson or thing that you've learned that later on, you're out somewhere and someone, oh, you're so great because of this. It's like, well, where did you learn that from? Right? It came from somewhere else, right? And even if you were meditating and it came to you, where did that come from? Right? So I believe once we start kind of giving that credit away from ourselves, it can actually allow us to relax into the fact that we're capable of so many amazing things. And having that faith and trust is multidimensional in this way. Not just, oh, I have faith things are going to work out, but also, oh, I have faith that the universe is incredible and it knows what it's doing. And like you, Nereyda, no one is going to be a more amazing version of you. Just like no one can be a more amazing version of me, right? We're literally the most updated conscious schematics of the universe, right?
Yeah. It's so fucking crazy. Like, as you're speaking, I feel like I'm having an aha moment of, because I've been doing this whole life coaching and the public speaking and the writing, and you're so right. When you realize that these things are coming to you and it's the universe, your self-doubt vanishes in a way. Like, as you said it, I was like, oh shit, like that's true. In those moments where I'm in that space and I'm aligned, it's not me, it's the universe. And the moment when doubt kicks in, when my ego kicks in, when fear kicks in, that's where that questioning and that unworthiness and the am I enough to do this kicks in. So that's fucking awesome. I'm gonna remember this and take a moment and just kind of soak that in and remember this feeling, remember that thought. Thank you for that.
Like to say I'm honored to be able to share whatever I've learned, and also I am grateful that I can be in a state where my brains are firing in such a way that I can express this. I have a question for you. Have you ever been in a state, Nereyda, where you don't feel like you can express something fully, and it frustrates you? Have you ever had that experience?
I want to say
Right?
yes, especially when I'm experimenting, yes, but where there's so many things going on, feelings, and sometimes it's pure love and I want to express it and I can't. Totally can't. Or I want to share it with somebody. I can't. Like, there's no words for it. I wanted to say something really quick, going back to what you were saying about how our creation, like the universe, right? It's the universe is in a way giving us energy and the alignment, and we're expressing, and it's the universe doing its work. I've read so many quotes on how when there's a dream in your heart, you're going to succeed because it's the universe. Like, all you have to do is just listen and see what it's telling you to do. So just a random quote. I don't know who said it, but yeah, going back to your question, yes, I have felt that way many times. Many times. And sometimes it's so funny because the other day I saw a post where it said, like, you're tripping on mushrooms or acid and you have like this major realization, and it's like, write it down, write it down. I actually saw it yesterday. I'll send it to you. And it's like, write it down. And you think it's going to be this whole in-depth, like, writing piece. And it says, you are bird, bird is free. Like, free is like something, you're free, basically, But it feels so much more deeper than you know?
Totally,
But
totally. Um,
yeah.
you know, I've had my own experiences with a few different psychedelics. Um, when it comes to discussing and talking about psychedelics now, what I really like to focus on is the integration. That is, if we discover, we feel, we learn, whether it's a reset or we're able to go in and quick fix some deeper traumas by like releasing and crying through it. Whether we write that down. What I like to focus on now is if psychedelics enter the conversation,
Mm,
I feel it's very important to discuss integration, right? Because there's, the classic psychological phenomenon of state-dependent learning, right? So if we don't integrate these lessons and, as you say, write them down, even if it doesn't make sense, um, you know, if we're not integrating this in our daily life, like what happens? That's now just a recreational drug, right? So it's not designed to be a recreational drug. Like it's a psychedelic. Like mushrooms, there are. I'm sure whoever's listening, they've had quite an eye-opening experience. But as
yeah.
many will also resonate with, if you say you do mushrooms, and then you don't integrate any of what you've learned or thought of, and you wait a few months, blah blah blah, you'll just end up going back into those patterns, right? Um,
Mm,
but the reality is we can get into some of those states through meditation. Um, and with psychedelics, one more thing. Well, one final thing with psychedelics is that where we are going today, even in the business world, is there are an increasing amount of people taking microdoses for efficiency, but also for outside the box creative thinking, right? And now we're seeing
uh,
all of these. We're seeing legalization in different states. Um, we're seeing all sorts of amazing things happen, especially with the mainstreaming of the regulated use of them in therapeutics, which I think is going to really crack
yeah.
open doors for people
I'm so
for people's
much.
mental
Mm,
health going forward. But again, I think it all comes down to integration, um, because ultimately we don't want to be dependent on any substance, whether it's an SSRI or it's even coffee. I mean, I'm a huge coffee addict right now, um,
um,
but ultimately, like we want to be able to uh, depend on ourselves, um,
correct.
and
Yeah.
ultimately that how do we get there? How do we get there from going from, having to take psychedelics to understand these things to not? Well, I would say it's simply integration. And one of the best practices uh, to to find this integration of this knowledge, of this universal wisdom that we can tap into, is through an embodied practice like yoga or qigong or any sort of breath movement practice where the emphasis is on the breathing, the in breath and the out breath, and the space in between.
Yeah. So it's going back to it's just a tool. Because I think uh, what I'm hearing is that, right? There's other tools that you don't have to use psychedelics to come to this realization of how everything's within or to learn new habits or so forth. Like there's so many other tools that somebody can use. Meditation, writing, um, other forms of exercise. Like you're absolutely right. And something that I also want to point out because you were saying integration was that you're right, right? Because it makes me ponder too on people that have taken psychedelics and it feels like there's no change and it's like wait what's going on, like I feel like you're missing something in a way, but then it goes back to my own practice of like letting it go, like they're on their own journey. But something that I've also been realizing is that it feels from my experience with the people that I've talked to about psychedelics is that even if they don't write things down or even if they have a trip once and they never do again or they have a bad trip, somehow those lessons or those experiences or whatever they learned from that trip, it's still there subconsciously. So even if they're not actively practicing it or actively trying to integrate it, somehow subconsciously something's changed. You know, it's like when you see truth, like once you see truth, you can't unsee it, no matter how hard you try. You know, so it's interesting. It's interesting to talk about psychedelics. Again, I always encourage it as a tool and nothing else. That's how I
It is a
hear it.
fantastic tool. It is a
Yeah.
fantastic tool.
So I'm really excited for like the world to be opening up in terms of using it for mental health. Like I'm really
Mm,
stoked for that because I think there's going to be a lot of changes. You already see research on how it's helped addiction and depression, and I can only imagine how much more it could help other people once the doors are fully open.
right?
And I,
Uh,
actually, one of my friends, high school friends, he messaged me because I post a lot of things on my Instagram of psychedelics being used as a tool or for mental health purposes. And he messaged me how I don't know how long ago it was, how he took, I don't know how much, but he definitely took a lot. And he was super depressed before. And he took these mushrooms and he had a major bad like trip where he was really tripping balls. But he said that afterwards it felt as if his depression left his body. And he said he will probably never try it again, but he said it was a great experience, you know, so it's super interesting. Super
well,
interesting.
that's just it. It's quite a bit of uh, a forced reset, right? So um, uh, I operate from the belief, and many in the community will share this belief that bad trips are most often caused by the unwillingness or the reluctance of opening that heart and Pandora's box of unhealed
Uh-huh.
trauma, right? So we get a lot of visions, we get a lot of things, but we get a lot of feelings, right? Our feelings are actually stored in different parts of our organs, right? If we have trauma, it is literally stored there. And what do
Yeah,
mushrooms do, especially when we increase the dosage? It
we were.
all of a sudden it overactivates all of our brain. So yes, we're gonna let's stay on topic. Um, it overactivates our brain in such a way where we can see a bit more, we can feel a bit more connected. We see things we don't normally see, right? Um,
Yeah.
and part of that is we see a lot in ourselves. And even if we don't see it, we feel it. And um, if we are unwilling to like submit to that and just release, release all this torment that we have inside us, we're going to have a very bad trip. We're going to have a very
Yeah.
bad trip. Um,
Yeah.
but
And that's interesting that
anyways,
you're
I
saying that
can't
because
pretend to know someone else's experience, but there are quite a few in the academic community who would share this. Academic? Psychedelic? Academic? How do we even define
I
them?
guess both, right?
That's funny. I,
I feel like it's both. Going back,
yeah,
piggyback on that, I realized that during one of my trips that when you have a bad trip, it's because you're resisting your own stuff, your own whatever it is that's going on, your ego, your fear, your trauma, like all of that. It definitely doesn't feel like that in the moment when you're having a bad trip, but that's what it feels like. And going back to like the tools, right? Because we mentioned how psychedelics is just a tool and how all of this is like stored in our emotions and not in our emotions, our organs and our bodies. Um, there's other tools too that can help release that from our bodies, like tapping, again, going back to like meditation, like somatic therapy, like so much exercising. I know earlier you mentioned how we store it in like moving our body, right? And it goes back to that,
yeah,
like moving our body and releasing it, you know?
yeah.
Back
And
to like
if
somatic.
I may inject a few things, that's a weird word to use right now, but into this conversation, into the field. Yes, Also, what other tools can we be using? We can be using writing. We can be using
Yeah.
art, right? Um, a lot of times people will say, hey, art is my meditation, right? And
Yes.
yeah, like we can become aware of so much more by slowing down or by directing that subconsciously or consciously onto paper, onto a medium, through like through a guitar, right?
Yes.
Some people will say heartbreak is the best thing that ever happened to them to write their album, right? All of these things. Um, to be able to release uh, not just release, but to become aware of. Um, the thing is most of us, and I, I, I believe there's no one who's truly exempt from it, right? Some people have uh, attained a practice or a level of skill and cultivation at not doing this so much as other people over time. Usually through the hard lessons of
Yeah.
projecting what we are holding inside of ourselves. And this is so common. Um, and as I'd like to quote Rosenberg here, the author of Nonviolent Communication, and he says, all
Mm,
judgments are a tragic expression of some unmet need, right? So we might have these unmet
mm,
needs, or whether they actually need to be met, or they're just our perception that needs to be met. It doesn't matter. Once we are mentally perceiving something, it's going to create that within us, right? And going back to linking it up with witnessing the fear and seeing the fear, if we can ask ourselves in a situation, take a step back and ask ourselves, okay, what is my unmet need here? Why am I frustrated? Why am I upset? Why am I scared? You can ask yourself, what is my unmet need here? And once we ask ourselves that, that's basically the most important step, right? It doesn't, whether there is an unmet need or not. If we see that unmet need, right, which we probably will, then we can further ask ourselves, okay, do I need this need met? Because most of the time we
mm,
don't actually need it met. It's actually our perception, which is again influenced by all these external factors, media, television, uh, well-meaning parents that have helped you be safe. Uh, Everyone's doing the best they can, and
yeah.
and eventually we
True.
all have these levels of trauma, and it is ultimately up to us to pick and piece it away so that we can be reborn, I guess.
Re- I love it. I want quick because it popped up the question of, is this need being met, right? And that's so interesting because you're right, it's a question that we should ask ourselves, and maybe some of us
Do I
miss.
need to get this need met?
Do I need to get, say it again?
Now, do I need to get this need met? Is it required or is it a part of my thinking? Because once we take a step back and we look at it, like as Eckhart Tolle says, uh, be the observer witnessing the thoughts, a lot of magic can happen. We can start utilizing everything else we've learned, right? What we've been trying to program into our brains with all the self-help and uh, all the yogic theories and all of these other theories. All of a sudden we get to start accessing those and applying it to uh, when we're taking a step back. We're no longer in the subconscious autopilot. We're saying, okay, where's this coming from? Where's this frustration coming from? Do I have an unmet need? Oh yeah, I think I'm feeling like I need this. And then you ask, do I really need that? And why do I need that? And then once we ask that, often we can realize, huh, well, I'm thinking I need that, but I actually don't. And then right in that moment, that's where the healing takes place. We're able to release that, and we've thus taken that step back. And it's it's
Really
I
quick,
guess
because it's
yeah,
another
yeah,
aha moment right now as you're speaking.
yeah.
So I'm ready because this is cool. Because there is that awareness, at least my experience, right? Of if I have a certain feeling arise, I'll ask myself, like, why am I feeling this way? You know, or what's my perception on this? Or like how we talk about like taking a step back and exploring it. But to ask ourselves, oh, this is a need, and asking the same question that you just asked, what was it? Do I need to meet this need, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was like
Yeah,
that's
is this need to be met? Need be?
like yeah, it's kind of mind fucking, at
Is
least
it,
for me right now.
is it
I'm
real?
still
If we
trying
ask
to
ourselves, we take that step back and we say, okay, well, why am I frustrated, or why am I tense all of a sudden? And right, we want to, say that thing on the phone, or write that text, or when we're talking to someone and they're questioning our viewpoint and we've learned something we think is valuable, we want to react to that. But what's that unmet need in us, right? In that situation might just be, I think what I have is valid and I want this external validation on it. Okay.
yeah.
So now that you've addressed, oh, I need external validation, where's that? Does it even matter whether it's from your parents? Psychologists will tell us it actually doesn't matter where that unmet need is from, right? We don't actually so much need to revisit the past too much and replay it in our minds, because now we're re-experiencing the emotions. But what we need to do is say, okay, do I need this external validation? Now that you're aware of what it is, that's the main point. Is like, do I need this external
Yeah.
validation? And then you hear yourself and you're like, oh, gross. Like, I can't believe I thought I needed that external validation, right? And then you can just relax and be
I'm
like,
laughing
like, you know,
literally. I've had those moments where I'm like, whoa, hold on, like, did I just say yes to that question? It's a bad. Yeah,
yeah,
okay. Yeah,
that's
that
the thing.
question
Like,
itself, the way that I see it is like, oh, there's this step, or there's this phase, and there's a whole other motion to it. It's not just this, it's this too. And that's where the healing can come in as well. And going back, or not, we didn't really talk about it, but going back to, not going back, but just talking about our own needs and our desires and what we value and what we want and what we don't want in our lives, not just externally but also internally. That's the way that I'm also taking it in. So it's a very important question to ask. Can you say it
yeah.
one more so I can rewatch it? And
Can you say that again? I didn't quite get that.
uh, the question, the need question, is
Oh,
this need
uh,
being met?
yes. Is this need being met, or what type of need is not being met for me right now? And then once we can answer that, once we can ask ourselves that, and then usually we can answer that quite honestly. If we're honest with ourselves, we can answer that, right? What do I want, right? And then if it helps you, if you still don't get it, and you want this person to do this, okay, well, write that down. And if you still can't, show it to a close friend. Be willing to be vulnerable in your men's or women's circle, or with your sister or brother or best friend, and because often an external point of view, they can help you. And if there's someone you can trust, then they can, like, oh, well, that sounds like ego, or that sounds like external validation, right? So once we see that, it's not as important as to, who's responsible, who to blame, back then, to heal our trauma. Because guess what? That just creates more trauma, right? Now you're in a state of non-forgiveness, right? It's more important to focus on upgrading yourself. More important to focus on, okay, well, I have this. Okay, how do I change this, right? How do I, like, what's the next step? And usually that is just um, consistency. So as these things come up, you repeat the process, and it's what psychologists would call either cognitive behavioral therapy, which is challenging your cognitive beliefs, or it is, or we could call it exposure therapy, which has its basis in operant conditioning, where you're constantly exposing yourself to something, and that will make it over time, more digestible, more easy, right? So if you have a learned fear, exposure therapy says, okay, the more you expose it to yourself to it, and go and gradually give yourself a cookie, give yourself some conditional rewards too, right? And make it good, make it easily digestible for you at first. Take baby steps, and as you do this, it just becomes easier and easier. But consistency is the key, right? I think we were talking over the phone how everyone has different things that either trigger them or they just that they struggle with at certain parts of the day. And I was telling you, I was being vulnerable, telling you where I struggle with, which is right early in the morning. And I believe it's a mixture of habitual conditioning and patterning, as well as, because I mean, we can sit here all day and say, okay, we can change this, we can witness this. But the reality is, if you've been on this earth for 20, 30 years, right? There's a lot there. There's a lot of habitual neurology and brain circuitry that you don't necessarily need to override, but it's good to be aware of what the heck is happening in your brain, and also just to be, give yourself a break, not beat yourself in the morning. How the heck do I feel I feel depressed, and I feel I'm limiting my beliefs, and I'm all fearful. And it's like, well, that's called compound interest, right? Yeah.
Compound
So
interest.
that's what we're taught to do. We're taught to, a lot of us are taught to do that, to almost like blame or get mad at ourselves for feeling these feelings. But what we're not taught to do is how to get over them. And what I was saying is that
Or you how to just witness
when I
them
wake
and
up, one second, I want to finish this thought. When I'm waking up in the morning, often I don't feel that great. That's when all of a sudden, all my progress from the last day, it almost seems erased in that moment. I have these fearful thoughts, self-limiting beliefs, but you know what's happening? My neck, my spinal cord, everything, I'm sleeping, right? So everything's been sedentary for so many hours, and really my brain's not receiving vital nutrients. So what do I need to do in that moment? What I found works is I tell myself, no, I can't afford to think like this. Why? Why can't I afford to think like this? Because if I just lay there and think like that, the brain just
Ooh. Did he freeze? Did I freeze? Somebody's frozen. Okay, let's wait a little bit. Ta-da! Okay, and he's off. So I don't know what happened. And oh well, I guess I'll end this because I don't know where he's at or where he's gone to, and my phone. So I guess perfect timing. He was gonna hit on a really good point, and we talked about this over the phone of fear and our emotions, and how sometimes when we don't have sleep or we don't have enough food in our system, fear can be more present. And I talked to a friend a while back, and we talked about anger and sadness and just other feelings, how they can also be more present when we're not having enough sleep, enough food in our system, when we're not going outside enough. But I just wanted to end that with that point because I wanted to ask him that as he was talking about that. So much love, guys. Derek, I don't know if you're watching. I don't know what's going on, but thank you so much for being on here with me again and for doing this video. A lot of fun. So we went on different topics, including psychedelics, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So much love, guys. Let us know your thoughts. Or if you have any questions, shoot me or him a message and we'll respond. So much love. Have a great weekend.